Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about one of the Apostolic Fathers, Pope Saint Clement I. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti, Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutora in principio et nunc et semper et secula seculorum. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti, Amen. All right, Clement, he's a bigwig. He's a bigwig. He's one of the three Apostolic Fathers. We did a video on St. Ignatius of Antioch, and then there's also Polycarp, which we'll do in the future. He's considered to be the fourth Pope of Rome. He reigned from 88 to 99 AD. We don't know about his birth or anything like that. We do know, and I mentioned in my treatment of Paul's letter to the Philippians, that he is mentioned in Philippians chapter 4, verse 3. But we don't know anything about his birth. Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, says that Peter baptized him. And he's generally regarded as the fourth pope. Some say he's the second pope, but generally he's regarded as the fourth behind Peter, Linus, Anacletus, and then Clement. And if you ever go to Rome, there's a very famous church named after him over there. And his feast day is November 23rd. So why is this guy important? Well, first of all, he was a pretty good pope. Secondly, we have some writings from him that have survived. Now, originally we thought that Clement had written a lot of letters, but really only one now is attributed to him, and it's his letter to the Corinthian church. And the reason that this is important is because he is asserting his authority as the fourth bishop of Rome, kind of to tell the Corinthian church what to do. So we'll talk about that in a second. But so he reigned as pope for about 11 years, and then Trajan the emperor sent him and banished him to present-day Crimean Peninsula over in the Ukraine. And there's some great stories about him. So when he arrived there, the prisoners were all very, very thirsty. And so he saw a lamb on top of the hill, and he went over there and he struck a rock, kind of like Moses, and water came out. Also, during his time there was a great missionary zeal, and allegedly, according to the legend here, 70 churches were founded because of Clement. Eventually, Trajan didn't like this going on, all this good stuff, and so he eventually had him killed, and he was martyred. He had an anchor tied around him, and he was thrown into the ocean. There's some legends about how when the tide ebbed, there was a fully intact shrine to Clement. But he eventually, like a lot of the early popes, and of course a lot of the early Christians, he was martyred. So let's go back to his writings. So Clement's letter to the Corinthians survives today, and it's undoubtedly him. Now there is a second letter to the Corinthian church that was attributed to Clement and a couple other writings, but now they're commonly seen as not written by his hand. This letter to the Corinthian church is written in Greek, and it's kind of important because he's asserting his role as Bishop of Rome and kind of having a control over all the other churches. And we know, and some Protestants don't know, like, why is the papacy in Rome? Well, because Peter, Matthew 16, and John 20, was given the keys of the kingdom. Peter happened to die in Rome. He was crucified upside down during the Nero persecutions around 66 AD. Paul was also martyred during that time. So I guess if Peter was martyred in, Hippo over North Africa, the papacy would be in Hippo. I guess that's present-day Tunisia. But he was martyred there in Rome, which made sense because that was essentially the headquarters of the known world. And so since Peter was the pope, he was given the keys of the kingdom. Linus, Anacletus, and then Clement stayed there. And of course, the papacy's been there aside from a couple major exile to Avignon the entire time. And so Clement kind of knew his role. He's the successor to Peter. And so in the letter to Clement, or to the Corinthian church, Clement writes a lot of addressing some of the problems over there. So the Corinthian church has a lot of strife, not much different out of the treatment we did on 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Paul's letters, the ones that are in the Bible. It's the same thing. There's a lot of strife. So he's kind of telling the church there in Corinth to stop fighting and to repent from their sins, their paganist ways. Some of the people in the church had kicked out some of the presbyters, some of the priests there, so he's addressing that in the letter. He's telling them to practice humility. And the letter, which you can read, it's not hard to find this letter, talks about how he's saying that apostolic succession exists. I have this role as the Bishop of Rome, and you need to listen to what I'm going to say. And you're going to put in these new priests. That's essentially what he's saying. I mean, there's other things that are talked about in the letter. But the reason the letter is important is because of that. It's an early church father. And in his writings and the other apocryphal writings attributed to him or ascribed to him, you see a lot of the proto-church, like we talked about in St. Ignatius. Now, he does mention Paul's letter to the Corinthians. He does reference that. He doesn't reference any of the Gospels, though for sure he had copies of at least the Synoptic Gospels by the time he was writing this letter, and certainly by the time he was Pope in the 90s AD. Gospel of John was probably written around that time, so he probably didn't have that, but certainly he had the Gospels. But he does reference Corinthians. And we talked about in that episode how the New Testament came into being, and we kind of talked about also in the episode of how the early church didn't have a written Bible, so how did they manage? So we kind of talked about how the proto-canon came into being. Now, some people ask, well, why isn't his letter in the Bible? Well, so the New Testament was formally canonized in the 4th century. Jerome had a lot to do with this, but we had a couple councils that determined what books were in there. And I'm guessing that if you look at the epistles that are in the New Testament, almost all of them are either written by an apostle, so like Peter, right, or John, or they're written by the greatest evangelist and apologist of all time, Paul. And so maybe since Clement wasn't part of that inner circle, so to speak, perhaps that was not in it. But I'm not aware of the official reason. So if any of you know, please post in the comments. But that's what we got about Clement. He is a very important person. His feast day is November 23rd. He is a saint, and he is one of the apostolic fathers. Guys, please post in the comments. Let me know. Like, for example, if you know why he wasn't put in the canon, I'd love to hear that. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Share with like-minded people. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.